All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining us today. My name is Kaylee McCain. I'm the Central Coast Regional Coordinator for CivicSpark, a national service program of the Local Government Commission. This is the second week of our poster symposium series for the graduating class of 2019 to 2020. And these presentation sessions are to celebrate their accomplishments and best practices found while serving local governments across California for the last 11 months. And today's session is entitled Local Adaptation Solutions, and you'll hear a mix of adaptation and climate action projects from across the state today. And we're really excited to get started. But before we jump into presentations, I just wanted to cover a few logistics. So if you experience any technical difficulties during today's call, you're welcome to message the co-facilitator for today, Sarah Wong. She is a regional coordinator up in the Sacramento, Sierra Nevada region, and she can help you troubleshoot any challenges today. Every fellow will have about 5 to 6 minutes to present their capstone posters. And we'll also have time for Q&A after each presentation. So we'd love to hear any questions that you have for our fellows. You're welcome to unmute yourself. You can also type your questions directly in the chat box, and Sarah and I will help facilitate those questions. Please also use the chat box to share any congratulations or words of support and encouragement to our fellows as they wrap up the end of their service years. We are also excited to share a new interactive project map with you all to visually identify where each fellow has served this year. And you can also open up a PDF of their poster using that interactive tool. So Sarah will share out that link in the chat box. You're welcome to poke around in that tool during this session and after, if you want to explore where fellows have been serving and what they've been up to. So without further ado, we'll get into the main show, and we're gonna start by hearing from Lauren. So I'll go ahead and cue to your slides.
Cool, thank you, Kaylee. Hi all, my name is Lauren May Sugay. I use pronouns she, they, and I'm the CivicSpark Climate Fellow for Butte County. I was originally tasked to address climate change adaptation solutions in Butte County post-Camp Fire. And for those that know, some folks call it the Paradise Fire, but that's incorrect because though Paradise did burn, a lot of the unincorporated areas did burn as well, making this the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history. The affected unincorporated communities include the communities of Magalia, Upper Ridge, Concow, Yankee Hill, Butte Creek Canyon, Centerville, and Honey Run. And more. So as you see, like it's not just Paradise that burned, but it's also other unincorporated communities that were affected as well. So when I started this project, I was tasked to generally help the county through the Department of Development Services be in compliance with SB 379, which addresses climate change adaptation solutions based on a local hazard mitigation plan and a vulnerability assessment so that local adaptation solutions can be found. However, the main challenge of my project this year was mainly due to low capacity and shifting of timelines, as well as shifting of directors in my department. So at that time, all I could really do was the process that you see in the middle right with research, coordination, and outreach and public education until more direction was guided to then create a framework. So my second half of my project, after the first being research and doing interviews and talking with community members as well as folks from other departments to see what has been currently being done to address climate change adaptation, or I guess sometimes in the rural areas because saying climate change is still new to them. So saying extreme weather events such as wildfire, floods, etc. What do they do to address that? My second half was actually to start to draft a climate change adaptation framework, which I call the Butte County Climate Change Adaptation Framework, BCAF for short. Once I had that direction, the objective of my second half was to create this framework, which will be used as an outline for stakeholders to collaborate, stakeholders and interested parties to collaborate together to find a set of goals, policies, and actions related to climate change adaptation that will fit their jurisdiction for the unincorporated areas of Butte County so that they can recommend it for adoption into their general plan. The Butte County General Plan is also addressing other Senate bills related to disadvantaged communities and wildfire specifically. And so this framework will not just only address SB 379, but also will be a way for them to address disadvantaged communities and wildfire as well through this process. So the main challenges when I was trying to look for like how do we find more context locally of need to be addressed is that there's an urban-rural divide. So whenever people suggest different environmental tools to look at disadvantaged communities or just any type of pollution, those tools were mainly used for urban areas where their air quality is different from rural areas. Rural areas, sometimes especially the ones in Butte County, are more affected by overstocked forests. So though they may have a lot of good air quality, they're more at risk for wildfire because of overstocked forests. And also another challenge, but also kind of a plus was it was 1 year after the disaster. So there have been a lot of collaborations in Butte County, which has been amazing to see a lot of people doing like, you know, their hopes were down, their hopes are up. So that they're like, yes, this is a landscape. We acknowledge that this problem, this event is a landscape level problem and therefore needs landscape level solutions. And they were very ready to talk with everybody, to talk with others, cross sectors to work on this project in addressing different needs that they had. And so that I could help shape this framework in a way that would help the locals as much as they can was to, as you see on the right, best practices was to actively seek out gaps and solutions to equity. So seeing who's at the table, who's not. If somebody's who, like any vulnerable community who's not at the table, I would reach out to them saying like, oh, hey, like, you know, your voice is important to this project, you live here, like what is your opinion on these gaps? Other practices include uplifting local, oh, okay, sorry. Uplift local needs via grassroots processes, allow for flexibility within timelines, and to relate information. And so this created into a framework that has 12 needs that was addressed and identified. And this is also guided by various county documents, state documents, planning documents, as well as our local hazard mitigation plan and climate action plan, which recommended measures to be addressed in the general plan, which was not already yet. And we could go to the other sides. These are just more reference to the research documents that I used. Next, these are the folks that I collaborated with. Okay. These are the folks that I collaborated with. The top ones are these are most of the champions that I was able to find within the first year. I found that finding champions for projects are very important, especially when talking about local adaptation solutions, because they're the ones doing the projects on the ground. Next. And these are our needs that we found. So there was a Upper Ridge Community Council along with the Campfire Long-Term Recovery Group. They had a previous community listening session, which can be found on rebuildbutte.com for folks who are interested in seeing what they want to be addressed, as well as a visioning workshop that I held with the Butte County Fire Safe Council with folks there to vision board what their gaps were and what they wanted to see. And so I kind of hybridized them to get these bullet points, but though it was mainly for wildfire, these needs can also be applied across to other climate change impacts. And that is what I did this year. Any questions? Oh, also this framework is supported by a resource document packet that I've been sending out to stakeholders to do the first phase of the survey, which is a public outreach survey, which is out right now mainly intended for organization leaders who work within Butte County or work with Butte County to address these solutions, to then recommend goals, policies, and actions. Within that resource packet is an adaptation menu that gleaned a lot of measures from other jurisdictions so that they could I like this one, I like that one, or I like this one, but would like it to be one that's more specific to Butte County. So that survey is there for them to input what they would like to see in the general plan.
Hey, Lauren, this is Kith. I got a question. I don't know if you can pop back to that last slide for a second, but when I looked at that list of items, yeah, that's like a roadmap to a whole lot of other programs and funding and structures that may be out there, like on the energy side or on the emergency side. Did you guys talk about like, okay, well, how do we get those goals tackled through these other tools, plans, and processes?
So right now it's more like a analyzing, and so the survey that I sent out is more is kind of like an extensive survey to double check if the current general plan measures are adequate to support those needs. And if so, that's cool. But if there are some gaps, the survey will hope to find those gaps to then create new programs or to shape other programs. So the survey will also be like, oh, we already do this. So, and maybe we'll have a framework, because we're gonna have 2 fellows next year. Hopefully that will lead to some type of list of already projects and grants that are out there.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. And we also have a question from Sarah. Was there anything that was surprising that came out of the listening and visioning sessions?
I think that something interesting that came out of the sessions was the need to communicate. Though like there was a lot of communication happening, I think that the emotional capacity and physical capacity of some folks is a little bit low because of the trauma that they experienced. But it was good to see the county with the unincorporated communities try to be in contact with those folks. Yeah, but you know, it's like this, it goes at the momentum of government, right? So sometimes that happens.
Thank you. Any other questions for Lauren? Again, feel free to unmute yourself or you can type it into the chat box. All right, well, we'll go ahead and move on to the next session. We might have some time at the end for more general Q&A. So if you have any further questions for Lauren, you can wait until then or feel free to reach out using their email address. All right,
Thanks,
so next up, we will hear from Michael and Yema, and we'll actually hold questions until both of them have presented.
Thanks, Kaylee. Such a great chance to kind of be in this virtual room with everyone today. Thank you to everyone who's attending today. I'm Michael Jimenez. I'm a CivicSpark Climate Fellow serving the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, Climate Change and Sustainability Program. This year, I co-led stakeholder engagement with Yema, Conteh, who you will hear from after my presentation. Our service sought to inform the development of climate change and health equity strategies for action, which you can see on the right side of the screen, which is a draft report and health policy framework aiming to achieve equitable health outcomes while building climate resilience across LA County and within our most climate affected communities. Last year, around early 2019, our program began drafting this report as our department's director established climate change and health equity as one of the department's annual priorities. And so the report seeks to establish 4 goal areas to guide this climate-focused health equity work. So 1, the first goal is informed, empowered, and well-resourced residents. 2, healthy and sustainable communities. 3, prepared and resilient LA County. and 4, effective and engaged public health programs. So a central component to achieving these goals and to kind of getting the report into action was by building community-driven partnerships and getting input from community stakeholders across LA County on the report. So that's what Yema and I were tasked with this year in developing and implementing a stakeholder engagement plan around this report. Next slide, please. Great. So to develop the stakeholder engagement plan, we had to do a lot of background research. So we ended up reviewing over 20 examples of engagement initiatives led by local health departments, as well as other local governments in LA County, in California, and even across the US. And we learned a lot from this and conducted somewhat of a mock literature review to kind of get a good understanding of what stakeholder engagement is, especially as representatives of a public health department. And that's the biggest takeaways are shown on the left side of your screen in that matrix of guiding principles. And then on the right, you'll see kind of a rough project timeline. The text might be slightly small, but something to note is that we did kind of carry out this program in 2 phases. So first, we developed and planned all of our stakeholder engagement, and then we shifted to implementing, where we were actually reaching out to the community. This happened around late February, early March. And external stakeholders represented community-based organizations, nonprofits, academic and research institutions, and kind of other smaller non-governmental partners. Some organizations include the University of California Program for Environmental and Regional Equity, as well as other smaller healthcare organizations too. And then we also received significant amount of internal stakeholder input and requests for partnerships from within the Department of Public Health and other LA County departments. 8 key informant stakeholders were contacted to provide early comments on the report and to engage in interviews around their feedback. And then in addition, we had a broader invite list ahead of a 2-part listening session, which Yema and I hosted in June. Throughout our outreach and engagement efforts, we aim to use best practices that we gleaned from our previous research, as well as from the wealth of expertise that DPH's own health professionals hold. And LA County is vast, it's huge, 10 million plus people. So our goal is to define community as broadly as possible when we were leading our outreach. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our listening sessions. You can see some screenshots of Yema and myself facilitating. They were held in late June, and we engaged in kind of virtual conversation with our stakeholders around different aspects of the report. So it was split up into 2 events. During the first session, our team at the Climate Change and Sustainability Program provided information around climate changes and equitable health impacts in LA County, its linkages with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the report's 4 goal areas, which I mentioned earlier, and some of its other content. And we also had some guest presentations from DPH's youth leadership, as well as an organization called Climate Resolve. And then the second session was focused around breakout sessions, which was really fun. We were able to hear some recommendations from stakeholders, on existing strategies, as well as comments on, where we could add additional strategies to the report. I think 2 interesting things from the listening sessions were, 1, a call to enact anti-displacement policies within our department's health policies and health protective decision-making, for example, in transit-oriented development projects with other LA County agencies. So anti-displacement, and then also, I think we heard a big call to engage with LA County's diverse tribal groups and governing bodies, as well as other kind of community-based stakeholders. Over 230 individuals received information about our program, and then between the 2 events, over 100 participants were engaged, which was really fun. And the event was originally planned to be in person with roundtables and one-on-one conversations, but transitioning our service to be remote actually allowed us to reach a broader stakeholder base and engage with more people than initially would have been possible. And we couldn't have done this without the support of our co-fellows in the LA region, who participated in taking notes and even providing emergency tech backup. I'm not sure if they're in the call, but please join me in thanking Aman, Amanda, Nat, Sunny, and Vanessa. Big props to you all. Next slide, please. So here are some steps on a semi-chronological timeline to follow our service. So in the immediate future, Yema and I will be following up with requests from stakeholders to partner with our program. We got a lot of requests like during and after our listening sessions, which is really great, as well as kind of cleaning up our project contact list to provide to our team for their future community engagement work. And then by the end of our service, which is in the next few weeks to about a month, we will be providing our transition plan to our team. And all fellows are required to do this, but I think it's especially important for our team because the end of our service this year kind of marks the beginning of a broader community engagement initiative that will be led by our program in the future around climate change and health equity. So even though our service is wrapping up, the work is just getting started for our program. And then kind of like a medium-term aspirational goal would be to establish a climate-focused community advisory council using virtual stakeholder engagement methods. So Yema and I we learned the abilities of virtual stakeholder engagement throughout our project, and we plan to kind of train our team on how to use those principles to continue the good momentum that we feel from our stakeholders. And then finally, there's a question of what LA County and what the Department of Public Health will be doing with the information collected from these conversations. So we want to kind of revise the draft report and finalize it and then operationalize it using community-based and community-driven partnerships as well. Our team has been working tirelessly to support DPH's COVID-19 contract tracing efforts. Right now our team's capacity is very limited, but once things settle in the future, whenever that may be, it's our hope that they'll be able to use the resources we provided as fellows to jump back into this work and kind of continue collaborating with community leaders across the county. So I'll pass it on to Yema now to provide some information on our service work with another DPH beneficiary. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, so thank you so much for listening and tuning in today. Michael mentioned some of the engagement work that we did with the climate program. I will be talking about some of the communications work we did with LA County Department of Public Health Center of Equity, which I'll refer to as the center for this presentation. So to give you a bit of background about the center, their vision is to ensure that everyone in LA County has adequate resources and opportunities needed for optimal health and well-being across one's lifespan. And so they're really just trying to work at the social determinants of health. So in 2018, after doing robust stakeholder engagement, they published our action plan, which you can see in the middle of the screen, some of the goals and strategic priorities. And so their action plan worked to reduce and eliminate gaps in health outcomes across LA County. So their action plan features 5 focus areas and 4 strategic priorities which work to reduce these health disparities. So for our service project, we chose to particularly focus on 2 areas of our action plan as they had the most overlaps with the ongoing work we were doing with the climate program. So the first area that we focus our efforts on was environmental justice, which again is one of the center's focus areas. And then the second area that we worked on was build public, private, and community partnerships, which is one of the center's strategic priorities. So having these focus areas in mind, we developed 3 project goals. Our first goal we created as fellows was to inform the center staff's knowledge around the nexus between climate change and health equity. This goal works towards several the environmental justice focus area. The second goal we had was to build and strengthen the climate programs and the center's stakeholder networks to gain input on the climate change and health equity work, and also just to continue, the center's, ongoing health equity roles and responsibilities. So that's kind of what we did. And so this goal pertains to the center's strategic priority area around building partnerships. And lastly, which is our third goal, but it should have been our first goal, was to work on implementing areas of the action plan that overlap with climate change and health equity, which of course works at both environmental justice and building partnerships. So next slide. So as we are working on these goals, we have three major accomplishments. Our first accomplishment was around amplifying cross-programmatic work. So in order to increase climate communications, you have to build partnerships with those who can help you with your work. So to facilitate these efforts, we created a pressure points document, which you can see at the bottom of your screen, that outlined the overlapping areas between the climate programs, climate change and health equity report, and the center's action plan. From developing this plan, we found initiatives and groups that we can kind of insert efforts in, such as DPH's Data Advisory Council, or Youth Advisory Council, Equity Champions, and LA County's Youth Networking Group. From forming these partnerships, this led to our second major accomplishment of presenting to the Department of Public Health's Youth Advisory Council around climate change and public health in LA County. So a lot of the advisors expressed how they weren't really aware of how climate impacts on health. So in addition to the presentation, we developed a tailored fact sheet based off of the questions that were asked during the presentation. Lastly, like Michael, discussed in depth during his presentation, we had two online listening sessions centered around the climate change and equity report, where we amplified some of the center's equity work, as well as received feedback on ways to improve our overall climate and health communications going forward in the post-COVID world. So some of the feedback included that we should provide climate messaging on a regular basis that highlights action that individuals can take to show, also to show people that their actions can make a difference, not only in improving their health, but also the community's health and to kind of reduce the health impacts of climate change. So in addition, other feedback included that we should continue to work on these engagement efforts to build awareness on the health impacts of climate change, as they're going to be the most impacted throughout their lifetime. So next slide. So with these presentations, here are some of our next steps. Our first next step is that we plan to provide the center some of our climate change and health equity resources to help increase our capacity for climate and health communications in the future. And so I didn't mention this in the previous slide, but we developed a climate change and health equity reference sheet, which discusses what is climate change, what are the climate and health impacts in LA County, how does it relate to health equity and environmental justice, as well as what is DPH doing to address the climate and health disparities. Our second next step is to distribute the feedback that we received at the listening session. So along with the feedback I mentioned earlier, we were able to receive a lot of feedback around climate communications, as well as ways we can kind of track health and climate change data. And so we plan to distribute that so we can kind of continue with the third next step, which is to continue to promote cross-programmatic work that we've kind of increased throughout our service year. Because I think, again, the only way that we can continue to do this work is if we have partners on board, and I think it's all about leveraging each other's strengths to kind of build together. Next slide. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. Feel free to email Michael and I at our emails, and I'll open it up to questions now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yema and Michael. Massive, massive work. We have a question in the chat box already asking if the info sheet on climate change and health equity in LA County is publicly available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's not available yet. We're still working on finalizing the details in it, but I think once the service year ends and like everything's finalized, we will hopefully make it public. Like our idea was to post it on the center's website, but that's still like a work in progress.
Thank you. And we've got another question here. Has your advisory committee or council started, and is there any resources other communities could use to set up?
This is Michael. No, we haven't started up this advisory council. It's actually one of the one key action in the climate and health equity report. And so I think that's something that, again, in kind of the medium term is kind of like one of my own aspirational goals for one of the next steps. And in terms of other resources communities could use, that's a great point. I think, you know, once this guiding framework that Yema and I worked on this year is posted online, it could also include like a statement around like how we develop this kind of stakeholder engagement plan using which best practices, and, you know, as other local jurisdictions access DPH's work online, then they can kind of use that as a resource. Thanks for the question, Kip.
Thank you. And I actually have a question for you all. Michael, I believe you mentioned that Climate Resolve was a partner in some of the aspects of your project. University as well. There are other partners in the LA area or even statewide that were helpful in your work.
Totally, yeah. I mean, again, we had engagement on different levels. I think some that come to mind would be, again, our academic institutions that we worked with, USC, UCLA. We had Communities for a Better Environment in conversation, though they weren't able to provide written feedback, as well as ECR Communities for Environmental Justice. These are great leaders in the LA area that I think anyone doing stakeholder engagement should be involved with. Community Nature Connection, which is a local kind of youth empowerment organization, as well as Pacoima Beautiful, API Forward Movement, large ranging list. Yema, I'm sure you could add some as well. And again, like DPH has its, they have different like lists and initiatives of stakeholder groups posted online already. So that's kind of what we started with, as well as a little bit of our own knowledge too. So yeah, a good list of organizations, and we ended up having about 8 informant organizations who were able to provide direct written comment on our work.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions for Michael or Yema? Again, feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat box. All right, well, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on to our next presentation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bianca. A big thank you again to everyone who's here, and also for anyone who has supported me or any other fellows throughout the service year. So first, I just wanted to start off with a bit of background about where I'm serving at the city of Albany. So that's right near Berkeley in the Bay Area. Albany is a city of 20,000, so we're pretty small, but that's actually something that's been a real asset this year, which I'll touch on later. So I've done a variety of projects that all fall within the city's Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, which was passed in December of 2019 while I was here. And I'll just refer to that as the CAP. So the CAP sets a goal for carbon neutrality by 2045, and it includes 4 pathways to achieve this goal. Advance active, shared, and electric transportation, electrify new and existing buildings, facilitate a carbon-free economy, and accelerate resilience. And so while the focus of this poster session is local adaptation, the majority of my projects were actually focused on the first 3 pathways. So thank you in advance for being here as I speak mostly about non-adaptation related projects, although I do think that some of the best practices I'll be discussing here, I think have been touched on already and can be carried over into adaptation planning. So first, I wanted to highlight 2 project elements that I've been working on that involve stakeholder engagement, and I thought I would kind of tie together the lessons learned from both of these projects. So first, I'll be discussing the sustainable procurement policy. So developing a sustainable procurement policy is an action item in the CAP that aims to reduce the city's consumption-based emissions and waste. And this also aligns with the CAP's goal to reduce waste to the landfill by 95% by 2045. And there was a previous environmental purchasing policy from 2007, which a lot has changed since then. It was outdated and it was not fully utilized by staff. So I worked with a consultant to create a new sustainable procurement policy. I've included a general timeline of this process on the poster, so I'll go over that. So the first step in this process was interviewing staff in charge of purchasing from all 7 of the city's departments. I interviewed about 10 staff in total. I gave them background on the policy I was working on, asked them about their purchasing habits, their most commonly purchased items, and formed a relationship with staff that I wouldn't know otherwise. And this part was important because we do not have a purchasing department as a city because we are smaller. So it's really staff who need to get on board for successful implementation of the plan. And I worked with a consultant on the more technical aspects of this policy, which do get very technical. So the consultant helped create guidelines for product categories. So this policy includes everything, includes guidelines from everything such as paper and office products, cleaning services the city uses, electronics, food serviceware, and a lot of public work stuff like the concrete that the city pours on its streets and more. So it's pretty comprehensive. And the policy sets out minimum required and preferred specifications for each product. And I've also included an emphasis on purchasing from small and local businesses as well. So then I essentially drafted the policy once the guidelines were mostly done and developed, and reviewed the guidelines with city staff. So months after first interviewing staff, I sent them a version of this policy for feedback to ensure that the policy is ambitious but also still achievable. And I'm currently finishing up incorporating staff feedback. Actually, tomorrow we're having a department with Alameda County, who has also helped develop these guidelines, and other cities in the county to make changes. And then I'll be making changes and finalizing the document based on this meeting as well with other cities who are working on a similar policy. And next steps, there will also be a staff training on the document in the coming couple of months, and the policy will include an annual review with purchasers about how the document is working for them. And the county is also going to be providing continued work to mainstream the set of guidelines, including hopefully a website to help staff find products that fit the criteria. And because this policy relies so heavily on staff participation, I do really think it was important to do internal engagement throughout to make sure staff were involved and had a stake in the policy and are engaged moving forward. So I also wanted to talk briefly about my volunteer engagement project. I was lucky enough to do it before COVID hit. So Albany has a platform called Carbon Free Albany. It's a social platform for Albany community members to track and reduce their carbon emissions at home, and that also focuses on reducing consumption-based emissions in Albany, as well as direct emissions from for example, burning natural gas. So the city adopted this platform in January of 2019, and I worked to increase engagement on the platform. I won't explain everything that I did for the engagement, but I did want to highlight a success along the way. So I partnered with the Albany High School Earth team to do outreach for the platform, and for a community-wide workshop I was hosting. So after asking the president of the club if they'd be interested in getting involved, I attended a few of their club meetings to see what their interests were. I presented the platform, and they were the ones who did brainstorming for outreach ideas, and they settled on door-to-door outreach for the platform. So I helped them come up with talking points, and then they hosted a session on developing elevator pitches, and I provided them with the materials, and they then took a Sunday to go door-to-door and discuss the platform with Albany community members, as well as the workshop. And they reached over 125 homes, and through combined outreach efforts for the workshop, we have over 50 people attend, which is awesome. And I think the best part was just seeing how excited they were after canvassing. It was a win-win, as it increased awareness about the platform, got people to come to the workshop, and it was a good leadership development experience for the high schoolers who loved it. And there's a post-outreach picture of them on the site, on the poster. So yeah, I think overall it's, as people have mentioned, it's important, more effective, and meaningful to co-create any policy or program with relevant stakeholders instead of just presenting it to them after the work has been done. And I think this is definitely best practice for community engagement, but it's also interesting to apply it to an internal lens as well. And overall, it was really rewarding to see the sustained interests in these two projects from both of the groups. Sorry for any background noise, by the way. But yeah, I'm happy to take any questions anyone has.
I'll jump in. I'll try to give other people a chance to. I got lots of questions. Really, really cool, Bianca. I'm curious, particularly on the procurement policy. Did you get, if I missed this, did you get to the staff training already, and how did that go, and or where's that at?
Yeah, so we have not gotten to that yet. So I've been working alongside with a consultant who has been kind of on behalf of Alameda County, working on creating these sustainable procurement guidelines. And unfortunately, the timeline didn't quite line up with my service year, but the idea is we're kind of going to have a collaboration session tomorrow with other cities to kind of go over some challenges that the policy might present. And then as cities work to kind of finish up and make sure that the policies work for them, after that, we would then have a training session for staff. So that has not happened yet, but that's something that is going to be kind of co-created between the county and the city of Albany too, and kind of go over how this policy works, and kind of train staff in like what to look for, and kind of what some of the certifications for different products mean, and go in depth on a couple kind of common purchases. So that has not happened yet, but so far the feedback from staff has been really good, and they, as I mentioned, they've been really engaged and overall really positive about this. So I think that sets a good kind of stage for the training session as well.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Any other questions? I think we can probably take one more, and then we'll move on to the rest of our presentations. All right, well, great work again, and we'll go ahead and continue on with our presentations for today. Thank you, Bianca.
Thank you.
All right, and next up, we'll hear from Maggie.
Hi, I'm Maggie, and I've been serving the city of Chico over the last 11 months. For some background, this year the city has undertaken and started and put funding sources towards a lot of an amazing progress towards climate action and resiliency. Chico hired its first sustainability planner, hired consultants and started the new climate action plan to meet 2035 and 2045 goals, and formed their climate action commission, the first commission in 20 years, to address adaptation and action within the city of Chico. With all these transitions and new roles and people, I did a lot of assisting and supporting work, and one large part of that was supporting work and amplifying these efforts through virtual engagement campaigns and a website overhaul. The main platform we used for the engagement campaigns was Facebook. I posted 2 to 3 times a week for Chico sustainability. There were multiple campaigns and social media posts that were launched throughout the year. Some notable campaigns that were launched were an extreme heat campaign, a climate action update campaign, climate action tips series, a series on the new climate action commission, and plan and shelter in place sustainability tips. For the extreme heat campaign, it educated residents on extreme heat, which is one of our largest climate impacts, dangers of extreme heat, and ways to stay safe during hot weather. Well, now it's ways to stay safe during hot weather during COVID, which is a little bit complicated and fun. The climate action update campaign increased transparency around the current projects the city was undertaking to reduce emissions as part of the climate action plan process. My supervisors and I did interviews with departments to try to get buy-in and understand what they were doing around climate action. And so I was able to grab some of that information and communicate that to the public. This included a lighting retrofit project, a wastewater treatment plant control system renovation, community choice aggregation, and a bike plan update. Another notable series was engaging residents in the formation of the Climate Action Commission and Climate Action Plan update engagement process. Due to COVID, any physical engagement was canceled, postponed, or went virtual. Chico just had their first virtual workshop for their CAP update, and this campaign assisted in outreach and engagement for the workshop. And I think there was a little more than 400 people engaged in that, which was great. For some other project outcomes, the project reached over 5,000 community members. Notable posts were highlighted and shared by city council members. The page has 300 new page views and an increase of 27% likes and followers. The second half of this project was a revamp of the web domain Chico Sustainability. The look, layout, focus, and content was very outdated. The website was revamped for the first CivicSpark Fellow, and so it was based on her energy campaign. So it was based on behavior changes for residents and businesses, and so I was to update it to what we needed today. I did extensive research into municipal sustainability websites and tabs throughout California and in select cities in the US. I researched city plans and policies related to climate, municipal codes, general plan policies, some former climate action plan policies, and some resolutions, as well as some statewide goals and mandates, mostly related to waste and water. The new website will have 7 new sections: energy and climate, adaptation and resiliency, urban forest, waste and water, and land use and mobility. One thing to note is there was a few things I would be doing physical engagement with, but because of COVID, it'll be integrated into the new website, and that was one reason that this project was taken on. Each section will educate residents on what the goals the city has made for sustainability, resiliency, and to reduce emissions, recent projects and progress made to address those goals, as well as resources and engagement opportunities. The change will hopefully result in increased transparency and information around goals and progress and projects like the energy audit Public Works is doing, the city's approval to join Butte Choice Energy, which is our community choice aggregation in the area, construction of new bike lanes, and how the city of Chico is working and interacting with the Vina Subbasin for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Residents can also use this to find ways to engage, like volunteering in Chico's parks, going to a climate action commission, or attending a tree planting event. There are no project outcomes yet. The website revamp is being launched now. And thanks for listening to this project, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Maggie. I'm just looking at your bio right now, and I see you graduated from CSU Chico, and you were able to serve there as well. And I'm curious if there was anything, having already lived in the area, that helped inform your approach during your service year.
Yeah, I mean, it really helped understanding the community as well as with volunteer projects. And there were some climate listening sessions that I was able to plug into and assist and amplify what the city was doing. And so it was beneficial. And I think I definitely helped amplify the connections with the community and the city. So.
Awesome, very cool. And I see we got a question in the chat box. Did you find any social media strategies and campaigns that were more successful or receptive by the public?
People always like a way to engage, and so people definitely were more receptive when there was a survey for them to do or for an event to attend or applications for the Climate Action Commission, and so those were highlighted and shared a little bit more than just tips. Extreme heat was also another campaign that was shared because there's so many dangers with extreme heat and extreme heat illnesses, and getting out that information was super important. And so I'm glad that the community latched on to that. So, yeah.
Awesome. And I think we got a related question. Did you find that your outreach efforts effectively built trust between the public and your agency?
I hope so. One of the reasons some of these efforts were taken on is because I'd be learning something about a project or goals or something that I think that as a community member, I would have liked communicated. And so I aligned the social media and the website to be transparent and have more information and access for the public. And so I believe so.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your service. And just looking at time, we'll go ahead and keep moving along to our next session speakers. Thank you so much. All right.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Emma Diamond, and I was serving this year with Erica Trinidad at the City of Sacramento Department of Utilities. We had a couple of great projects this year that we're really excited to tell you about. So my primary project that I kind of took the lead on, and Erica helped me out with a lot, was the sustainability policy for the Department of Utilities. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. I made some extra slides to just zoom in on this poster because I know lots going on. So if you go to the next one. So the purpose of the sustainability policy is to commit the DOU to future sustainable action. Right now, there isn't a lot of focus on climate, and so our sustainability team is trying to make the DOU commit to future implementation strategies to facilitate climate action in general. If this plan were to, if our draft policy were to be adopted, it would help us comply with a wide variety of state and local policies, including SB 100 and AB 1668. So SB 100 being California Renewable Energies Portfolio, and our and water management planning for the state, as well as local policies trying to get City of Sacramento down to carbon neutral by 2045, and other goals from the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change. We really believe that it's important to take climate action, or an active role in climate action, instead of just focusing on complying with city policies, so that it's really written into our own policies, programs, and everything, and operations. So we really started by choosing 8 priority areas. That is going to be how the sustainability team focuses all of our sustainable action in the department. So these include climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, energy efficiency, water conservation, waste management, sustainable infrastructure, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and innovation. So we're really excited to have such a broad broad highlights on everything to work on to help the Department of Utilities become a more sustainable utility. A little background on Sacramento. The city is really vulnerable to a wide variety of climate change impacts. This can be from really severe rain events and floods and increasing length and severity of those. There is a lot that Sacramento needs to prepare for, especially in terms of water. We have a combined sewer system, which makes us specifically vulnerable to flooding, which means we need to really keep an eye on our city's infrastructure. I included a picture, one of my favorites, of the Great Flood of 1862 down K Street on Sacramento, which really encouraged the building of levees and floods. So this isn't ever going to happen again, but that really means we need to focus on sustainable development of our city's water infrastructure so that we are able to stay resilient against severe rainstorms and floods in the future. So our top 3 goals that were written into the climate policy, or into the sustainable policy, is to become a carbon neutral utility by 2045, achieve climate resiliency in utility infrastructure and operations, which Erica is going to talk a little bit more about later, and advance and prioritize equity and environmental justice in plans, policies, and programs. So these are the top 3 goals that really guide the rest of our document. So again, if this policy is to be adopted by the City Council, which is on our next steps, the potential outcomes, one of the biggest items would be a creation of a sustainability action plan. So we really want to deep dive into the best tactics and recommendations that the Department of Utilities can put into action so that we can become a carbon neutral utility and we are able to achieve the rest of our major goals. We want to strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters. So making sure we're able to bounce back from any floods or drought or any climate-related events. And then hold DOU accountable towards benefiting and not disproportionately harming vulnerable communities. So making sure that everything we do is done with an equitable or with an equity lens and through environmental justice policies. Those are just a few of the commitments that are in the policy, and we will be really excited for when it is adopted to see what other great outcomes come from it. Thank you. We will be waiting for questions till after Erica goes.
Hello, everyone. I am Emma's lesser half at the DOU, also her intern. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my project, or the one that I focused on a little bit more. But before that, I wanted to say thank you for everyone in your being here, and also the opportunity to share about Emma and I's efforts with the DOU. And obviously, thank you, Emma, for being my co-fellow. My project was more focused on risk and vulnerability planning and checking the feasibility of different tools in adaptation planning. So to provide some context, last July, my supervisor and I went to attend a workshop about this EPA tool, the Climate Resilience Evaluation and Awareness Tool, or CREATE. And we thought, wow, this could be helpful for the DOU. It was kind of an assistive tool on risk and vulnerability assessment, critical asset identification, threat monetization, and seemed to be a really, really excellent exercise in identifying future adaptation solutions specifically for the water sector. And as Sacramento's water utility, it seemed like a good option for us. So by September, we had began pursuing and kind of reaching out and seeing like how could we also be a case study in using Create, and could we serve as a case study in checking the feasibility of using Create in adaptation planning within the local public water sector. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our timeline, a few challenges we ran into, some of the solutions or outcomes and their next steps. So I think one of our biggest challenges was definitely timeline shifts, and obviously no one could have planned for a global pandemic. I think that was one of the biggest challenges. We had already been experiencing severe timeline shifts just due to having difficulties reaching out to the US EPA and kind of coordinating with them, seeing if the Department of Utilities was a viable kind of like case study for them to assist. And so that was a little bit difficult. We were supposed to have in-person workshops in March, which ultimately didn't happen. But I think it also showcased like the importance of resiliency and within our sustainability team. We moved forward in March and April to kind of see like, can we move this virtually? Is there still a potential to continue using the tool? And it seemed like there was. So we worked very closely with the EPA's consultant in transitioning the project remotely and virtually, which proved to be a little bit difficult because a lot of the process of risk and vulnerability assessment using this tool involved a lot of really technical information from our facilities and our systems. But I think, again, reframing this challenge brought about some really generative solutions. For example, it kind of forced different intra-departmental teams within the DOU to really work together and get, I think ultimately it helped get their buy-in into Create. So talking about some of our outcomes, unfortunately, I think the tool didn't quite meet the expectations of the DOU, and that's okay. I think that instead of kind of churning out a line-by-line adaptation plan and risk and vulnerability assessment, I have a quote here from one of the lead engineers that from DOU that kind of participated in this project. And she had said that the value of this tool is the conversation. And I think that is super important. And I think that it is 100% true. I think that going through this year-long process of trying to use Create within our department brought about a lot of really generative conversations between teams that might not have otherwise communicated with one another. And I think that it arose some key next steps. Our next steps is to hopefully kind of recognize the importance of risk and vulnerability assessment. I think that this process showed that the DOU is not adequately prepared at this time with climate change related risk assessments for their critical assets. And as the city of Sacramento's main stormwater, water, and drainage utility, something like what Emma mentioned earlier in regards to huge floods is probably something we want to protect or prevent. So hopefully the DOU continues with their adaptation journey. Thank you. Oh, I don't need that slide.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Emma
Yeah.
and Erica. Let me try to go back now to your poster and see if we have any questions. I have a question for Erica. I know this was actually your second year as a CivicSpark Fellow for the Sacramento Department of Utilities. And I'm curious if there were any threads that you were able to, or themes that you were able to pull out of both years serving the city.
I think one that's most relevant to CivicSpark as a program is that the fellows are pretty necessary within our department, I think, or the different departments. It became really clear to me how important this work is and how much capacity is actually built by the fellows within their different agencies, even though obviously my experience is only with the DOU. Just in between my 2 years, you know, when I first started, there was just my supervisor and I, so a 2-person sustainability team trying to kick off a sustainability program. And in my next service year, I not only had Emma, but we also had Sam, who's a new analyst and a superstar at the DOU. And it is like night and day, what implementation and planning and collaboration, what even the conversation looks like regarding sustainability and climate resilience. So if I took anything away from my 2 years, I think it's 1, the value of this program, and 2, that it is incredibly helpful to some of these agencies to have the fellows help in kicking off their sustainability programs.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And we did get a question through the chat box. Were there any best practices in navigating conversations that y'all had with stakeholders to be more intimately involved with the project or have them buy in more to addressing risks and vulnerabilities?
I think both Emma and I can talk a little bit about how much of an impasse lack of buy-in can be. So I'll talk a little bit about what it looked like for the risk and vulnerability assessment. I think that the DOU, being primarily a department of engineers, sometimes there are, or I learned that there are ways to speak to different groups of folks to better align our interests, that in fact we're not so different. It's just that we might not be speaking the same language. I certainly don't speak the language of an engineer, but to get that buy-in, I think persistence was really important. Our first great meeting, and Emma can attest to this, was tragic. Really not great. But I think finding your comrades within different departments and bringing them all to the table. So moving beyond asking who's not at the table, but asking what are the barriers that are posed to those folks from even showing up to the table is super important. So I was revolutionized by meeting the folks at the operations and maintenance at the DOU, and it just really, really proved to me how important it is to broaden the reach of a project and see who might be supporters and comrades in unlikely places.
Yeah, just to add on for a second, I think I realized that the presentation I just gave everyone here was really about, it's like a very similar presentation that I've been preparing to give to DOU employees about why it's important that Sacramento focus on climate resiliency versus like usually I would tell you guys how we went about our sustainability policy, but we were able to find our co-conspirators within the department to address climate change. We have a close coworker, Rick Matsuo, who we work with for our energy efficiency projects, and he looked over our energy efficiency section of the policy. And it just makes us feel like we are not just the sustainability team doing all of this work for the Department of Utilities, but we do have our partners around. And I think we are slowly getting, friends across the department to help us with these projects.
Could I really quickly add that a couple months ago, we got the opportunity to join the USDN, is that the Urban Sustainability Directors Network? For future fellows, it is super, super good. And this harkens back to what Emma was talking about. It just helps to not feel like you're not the only person that's really, really focused on this work. There are so many other folks that are doing this work, and it helps to feel that you're not alone.
Not sure if we're over time, but I have a quick question to build on that. Kaylee, are we good, or do we need to move on?
I think we can do one more and then we'll move on.
Hopefully it won't be too big going. The questions you were asked were about both community engagement and kind of working internally. And I wonder, Erica and Emma, from your vantage as a fellow, and you also talked about that, like the process of trying to translate some pretty complicated information to community groups and across departments. Do you think being a fellow, your perspective and the work you do helps you help your city partners do a better job of engaging effectively with community members? Do you guys see things differently that helps kind of get that word out there more effectively?
I would say definitely. I think the Department of Utilities, whenever they hear from our perspective, it makes them feel more like they're hearing from the community's perspective. Like we look more like people from Sacramento, really working for the city of Sacramento rather than just the Department of Utilities. So it really feels like we're communicating the needs and ideas of the community. Erica, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I would agree. And I think a part of something that helps is that both Emma and I are townies. We both grew up here, and I think that is a very different stake that we have because this is our hometown. And I think that resonates with a lot of the folks that we get to talk to. Unfortunately, we didn't get to have as much community engagement and outreach events just because they were postponed to later dates. But I think it helps. And even something like Emma drafted a sustainability webpage, and I got to work on a water conservation webpage. I think little things that we got to work on helped the DOU kind of bridge some of the gaps between the department as a utility and the community that it serves. I mean, that's 500,000 people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emma and Erica, for your service. We will go ahead and move on to our very last presentation of today. We'll hear from Naomi.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Kaylee, for the introduction. Thanks, everyone, for being here. My name is Naomi Albert, and this year I served as a CivicSpark Fellow with the South Bay City's Council of Governments in Los Angeles County. And my project was helping cities develop climate adaptation strategies to later integrate into their city documents. And this project was really building off 10 years of collaborative planning that had happened at the South Bay City's Council of Governments. So previously in 2018, the organization had helped the cities develop climate action plans, which were adopted in 2018. And after those plans were adopted, the organization shifted focus to helping cities with their climate adaptation planning. So the climate adaptation phase of the project was really spearheaded by a prior CivicSpark Fellow who created vulnerability or city-specific vulnerability assessments for each of the member cities, and then also developed a sub-regional climate adaptation plan while working collaboratively with city staff. So I came into the project with these documents already created, and my role was to take that information that had been presented in the vulnerability assessments and the sub-regional climate adaptation plan and help city staff understand how they could act upon that by developing climate adaptation strategies. So the goals of the project were really to catalyze and support local climate adaptation planning with the goal of increasing sub-regional climate resilience and also supporting compliance with Senate Bill 379, which is the legislative requirement for adaptation planning in California. So I worked with 9 cities in this project, and it really was a diverse group of cities. They ranged both in size and also in environmental factors. The smallest city I worked with had a population of less than 2,000 people, while the largest city had over 146,000 residents. So there really was a large span of how much resources the cities had, and also what their populations were like. They also faced different climate hazards. Some of them were inland cities, some were coastal, and then some were more on the urban wildland interface. And so they had different climate hazards that were relevant. Also, there were differences between economics and social factors in the different cities. And there was different levels of social vulnerability and different social vulnerabilities between the different cities. And those were really indicated in the city vulnerability assessments. So our challenge was really to compile a matrix of strategies that met these diverse risks of these different cities. So to initiate the project, we had an initial meeting with city staff for all the member cities. At this meeting, we really presented the project and also introduced adaptation planning to a lot of city staff. A lot of the cities that we worked with did not have a dedicated environmental staff person and really didn't have the expertise in their own staff about these issues. And so some were introduced to, what climate adaptation was for the first time through these meetings. So after that initial city meeting, we developed a matrix of climate adaptation strategies that could be used kind of as a menu of what cities could potentially do to address their climate risks. And these strategies were based on the vulnerabilities that were identified through the city vulnerability assessments, as well as the sub-regional vulnerabilities that were identified in the sub-regional climate adaptation plan. And strategies were compiled based on state guidance documents, as well as a review of local climate adaptation plans from communities throughout California that had similar climate risks. So after this matrix was developed, we then met with each city individually, and we gave the matrix to city staff and asked them to select strategies that they felt were feasible and implementable in their city, and that also addressed the risks that were identified in their climate vulnerability assessments. So we gave staff some time to review the list of strategies, and multiple staff from cities, in some cases, reviewed the list. And then the cities provided us with feedback as to what strategies they were interested. And with that feedback, we created a document for each city that contained a list of selected strategies, as well as introductory language and implementation examples for each strategy. Cities also had the opportunity to revise strategies, modify them, create additions, and we hope that these documents can be used as a resource for cities to integrate into their city plans going forward and build their capacity to address climate change through their city documents. This project also increased the knowledge of city staff about climate adaptation and resilience issues. As I mentioned before, some staff really hadn't been introduced to the idea before. In addition, the city also provided some information to the South Bay Cities Council of Governments. From this project, we're able to understand what adaptation strategies cities are interested in, and then we can use this information to better direct further support that we give cities and further resources to help in strategy implementation. So that is all that I have for today. I'll now open it up to any questions. I've also listed my email on the next slide, so I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have by email as well. Thank you.
Hi, Naomi. I have a question. Great. Oh, but first, great job on your project. I'm actually a local from South Bay. I actually grew up a little bit in like towards Inglewood area and then moved to Torrance. So that's cool to see this project. Has there been inclusion with how like community members can get more involved with their cities, and has the cities been like with climate change adaptation, knowing how structures can like have more resources go to more affluent communities rather than the less affluent communities, and how they deal with those situations? Have there been recommendations for those issues?
Yeah, definitely. Torrance is one of the cities that we worked with. Inglewood already had some sort of a plan in place, so we weren't able to work with them. But those issues were definitely considered in the strategies. Unfortunately, in the scope of work that I had, we didn't have the capacity ourselves to do the community engagement, which I think would have made the project so much better. But at the South Bay Council of Governments, I was the only dedicated staff person working on this. And so the real goal of the project for this year was to just develop these strategies as a resource. However, some of the strategies were really focused on community engagement. And so some of the cities selected, and we really encouraged them to select strategies kind of indicating how they're going to pursue community engagement, and also to think about how they would engage the communities as they're working to further adopt these strategies going forward. So that was definitely considered. We also definitely tried to integrate as much equity into all the strategies, and always try to think about how resources could be best directed towards communities that needed them the most. So equity was kind of baked into the strategies as well, at least a first attempt at it. And then of course that would really be bolstered by having community engagement and community feedback on the strategies specifically.
I have a question. I'm wondering about what the responses were like from city staff that you were talking to, because I could imagine there could be some who are really grateful, but also maybe a hesitancy among some staff who aren't as familiar with adaptation work. Definitely.
So it was a challenge trying to get city staff from some cities to be enthusiastic about the project because, as I said, there wasn't a dedicated environmental staff person. And so it was really taking time out of the work that they would be dedicating towards other things to even review these strategies and even get this conversation started. So I think that something that really helped have to encourage cities to take this seriously was to direct them to the legislation and remind them that yes, this is required through this bill. I think that encouraged them to think about it more seriously. Also trying to get them to ways that the city could integrate adaptation into its policies without having direct capital investments right away that they might have capacity for, especially right now. So looking more at how they could mainstream adaptation into how they review projects and strategies like that. So yeah, I would say that was a definite challenge, but also part of the project that was really rewarding because we were able to kind of involve various staff people from all these cities who hadn't been involved before, and we hope that those conversations will continue after the fellowship ends.
Thank you. We also have a question in the chat box from Erica. And Erica was wondering if you could share on what prioritization of community/needs looked like.
So we really left it up to city staff to select which strategies they felt were appropriate for the city. And so the cities are going to have to do further prioritization of the strategies. The strategies that we compiled were solely intended to meet the climate risks in the entire subregion. And so we had to develop a suite of strategies that worked for all of the cities and that cities could then pick and choose from. So that prioritization work is really going to be at the city level. And we're really encouraging them to do that further and trying to develop some resources to help them prioritize further. but we gave an equal set of policies to all the cities that we worked with.
Awesome. I'm also curious, since you got to work with 15 cities, which is a lot, if you saw any commonalities between them about who, like what departments were involved in this sort of work, especially if they didn't already have somebody whose full-time focus was on environmental services.
Definitely. So we principally worked with planning departments, economic development departments, and then public works departments. And then in some cities, we really encouraged them to involve as many staff people from different departments as possible to really get an interdepartmental team. So in some cities, we also worked with parks and recreation, and other departments like that. It was also really helpful if the city manager was on board with the project and if there were department heads at those initial meetings, so that they were the ones really catalyzing the project forward at the city level.
That makes sense. Sounds pretty similar to the spread of departments that our fellows work with. Awesome. And then one more question through the chat box, and I think we'll conclude today's session. But the question is, what are the main questions cities are coming back to you with about the potential strategies?
The main question that we're getting back from cities is funding for strategies. And many cities have indicated interest in strategies, but say interested contingent on funding. So I would say funding is a major limitation. Also, cities are interested in seeing successful implementation in California, other Californian communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Naomi. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and conclude today's session. Congratulations to all of the fellows who presented today. And thank you to the audience for your participation, support, and encouragement. Please continue to support our fellows as they wrap up the end of their service year and move on to their next steps by either reaching out to them via email, as we showed on the screens today. My colleague Sarah will also be sharing out our website where you can find our fellows' email addresses. I believe most fellows are also on LinkedIn as well if you'd like to connect with them. And if you'd like to attend additional poster symposium sessions, we have 2 more. Tomorrow, we'll hear from fellows about their clean and accessible mobility projects. And Sarah will also be sharing out the link if you'd like to register for those sessions. Finally, we'll have our graduation ceremony on July 30th, which will be our final celebration of our fellows as they conclude their service year. And everybody is welcome to attend and listen to some great speakers we have for that day and celebrate with our fellows. Finally, a recording of these sessions will be available, and I'll be emailing those out to all attendees. And we do have our interactive project map on our website if you'd like to look at fellows posters after today. Thank you so much all for attending, and thank you again to our fellows for your presentations today. Take care.